I'm not sure if they're up forever or what we thought, but yeah, I just sent an email, so maybe just respond there.
Okay. So for anyone watching, this is Professor Evan Risko, and he's a cognitive psychologist, and we are both the VP of Academics for PsychSoc. So I'm Grace, and this is Jerica, and so we're just going to get started with some questions that students sent in. So the first question that we have is, what was your education and career path that led you to your position where you're at right now?
Well, it actually started at the University of Waterloo. I did my undergraduate degree here. I came in thinking I would do something like forensic psychology or criminology. So initially it was kind of sociology courses and psychology courses. Towards the end of that degree, it became pretty clear that psychology was uh, my speed, and experimental psychology and cognitive psychology in particular. So I kind of shifted away from sociology and shifted a bit into computer science and programming type courses to complement the cognitive work that I'd come to focus on. After the undergrad, applied to a few graduate schools, but decided that Waterloo was again the place I wanted to be. I stayed here and did both my master's and PhD with Dr. Jennifer Stoles and Dr. Derek Besner. After that, it was a postdoctoral fellowship at the University of British Columbia with Dr. Alan Kingstone. Then started my first faculty position at Arizona State University. It was lovely, wonderful memories, especially as it gets colder here, of my time there. And then I was there for a couple of years, and then went to the University of Memphis, and was there for only a year. And then the opportunity came up to come back to the University of Waterloo, where you find me today, and where I hope to stay for many years to come.
Awesome, thank you. For our next question, we want to ask how research is part of being a professor.
Research is a big part of being a professor. So we all have our own research programs that we're pursuing, each and every day. I know sometimes we like to think about kind of research and teaching separately, but I think when you look closely, those two things are deeply intertwined. We have most of the time when I'm teaching about research in the area in which I do research. Other times we're, doing 499 theses, mentoring graduate students, teaching like 390 in the research methods courses. So even in the teaching, we're teaching people to do research. And so what that ends up meaning is that, even when we're doing other things, research is kind of front and center. So it's a big part of a professor's day-to-day life.
And then, like, with that being said, what's your lab currently researching? What are you guys investigating?
Yeah, so I think we have generally three kind of areas that we've been most active in recently, and they're related, but can be kind of described separately. So the first is, how does kind of external tools or our body help us think, and how does that impact our thinking? The second is kind of more learning and education focused. So here we're interested, for example, in the design of video-based lectures. How do we design those to best, to most effectively teach whatever it is that we're hoping to teach? The third kind of area is the perception of effort. So effort is this kind of really fundamental construct, but one that's kind of difficult to get a grasp on experimentally. So we've been working for a number of years now and trying to understand how people perceive, let's say, task A as being more difficult than task B.
Really cool stuff. Going off of that, is there anything that you want to research more about or conduct a study on in the near future?
Yeah, I think a number of projects in the lab have come to start to focus on something we would call metacognition. So this is kind of how we think about our own thinking. And I think that's going to be a big part of our future. So how does, let's say, technology use impact how we think about our thinking? How can we kind of conceptualize our kind of effort judgments as metacognitive judgments. On the learning and education side, so again, here what we're trying to do is take principles in cognitive psychology and try to translate them into kind of useful pedagogical practices. And one particular area that I think we've become interested in is something called active learning. And it's an approach to teaching that's just different than like lecturing, right? Standing up and lecturing. It's a different approach, and it's become popular in education circles. And I think as researchers, we're interested in digging into it as an approach to understand more why it's effective or not effective.
Okay, so then changing topics a little bit. So if a student is interested in going to graduate school, but they're not sure which area in psychology, what do you think is the most either important course or the best way to prepare for the idea of grad school?
Yeah, so a big part of graduate school is research. And there's a number of areas, as you both know, in psychology to pick from. So I think trying to get research experience in different labs is probably a great first step. That can be in a kind of volunteer capacity, that might be in a kind of paid capacity. If you're interested in the natural sciences, we have a NSERC, it's what's called the NSERC USRA program that will allow you to be a kind of paid full-time research assistant for a semester. So those are kind of the working in the lab kind of approach. And then the other way to get that, a similar kind of exposure to different types of research and different research experiences is the I guess large number of courses that are kind of research focused. So I think it's 389 in the social sciences, 390 in the natural sciences. So these tend to be like high level research courses. Then we have those are courses with 20, 25 people, but then there's the apprenticeship courses, the directed studies courses, and I think again these are you can do them in the social sciences, you can do them in the natural sciences, you can even do them in statistics, and then there's the big one at the end, which is the 499 thesis, right? So each of those, and again you can take many of them, and you can take many of them with different faculty in different areas, just to get a sense of what it is you're passionate about, and use that to guide your graduate school decisions.
So with that being said, if someone's looking to apply to graduate school and they don't have any research experience, is there any way that they can make up for that?
Yeah, so I think I'll give you a couple perspectives on that one. So I think the first thing to note is it's going to be a challenge. It's a bit of an uphill battle. Most graduate programs, especially research-focused graduate programs, are going to want the people coming in to have some kind of research experience. So that's beneficial for those programs, but also I think it's important to emphasize that it's important for the student as well. I don't think that research is for everyone. We certainly have students come into the lab, get involved, and had that experience lead to them deciding, I don't think I would be interested in research as a career. And so I think it can be useful to help the students in their decision making, because graduate school is an enormous investment. Even the applications, which a number of students are going through right now, is an enormous investment. So I think having that experience is important from the selection side. But let's say that you're committed to wanting to do research in graduate school, but for whatever reasons you can't find your way into a lab, can't find your way into some of these research-focused courses. I think one thing you can do is to kind of interrogate what research experience is, right? So the reason why it's valuable, at least the reason why it's valuable to researchers, is it means that students are coming in with skill sets that are going to be relevant to the things that they're going to be asked to do in graduate school. So you might ask whether you could get some of those skills not in a research lab. So, in our domain, having some kind of programming skills is super useful, statistical skills, are super useful. And what's important about those is you can pick those up in other courses on campus, and you can pick those up online through services like Coursera or something like that. So you might have to make the argument in your application that while I don't have a lot of in-lab experience, I have taken the time to develop some of the skills that would have come along with that, like programming or statistical skills or something else you think of that might have come along with research experience. And it might not be the perfect solution, but it certainly demonstrates that you're trying to make up for what might be perceived as a deficit in your application.
So then on the flip side of things, if there's a psychology major who's kind of unsure about grad school, what are the kinds of professions people can go into, like, that these skills apply to?
Right. So I think you said the right thing there. So you mean in terms of transitioning from, let's say, undergrad into the workforce?
Yeah, so if you're like uncertain about grad school, so maybe it's like you're taking a few years, or also you're certain about not going to grad school. What are like other opportunities?
Yeah, so I think what you mentioned was correct. What you want to think about is the skills that your undergraduate degree has provided you, and then try to imagine the different jobs out there and how those skills might be beneficial in those areas. Because I think you might find that there's not going to be a whole lot of jobs where undergraduate in psychology is a prerequisite, right? But the skills I think you gain are helpful in a number of different domains. In our lab, and we're a cognitive lab, so we've had people go from their undergraduate degrees into like user experience, kind of design type positions, into like data science oriented positions. Outside of our students, outside the university, I've encountered people with psychology degrees in like the fundraising world. I've encountered them in kind of the social service nonprofit sector, where you can find roles where sometimes your research skills and your psychology knowledge can be very useful. Then there's the marketing, advertising type route as well. So I think it's about trying to look at that ad, and while the ad might not say requires an undergraduate undergraduate degree in psychology, if you can see that your skills would be relevant, I think it's making an argument to that effect in your application can be useful.
Very insightful question or answers. Thank you. Now moving on to more cognitive specific type questions. Could you tell us a little bit about thought processes and how adaptable they are?
Yeah, how adaptable thought processes are. I think that depends how one wants to define thought processes, and we can do that in a couple different ways. But like, let's say if we mean by that, of course we all learn, and if we interpret learning as adapting our thought processes to the environment, then I think we'd say they're kind of highly adaptable. I think universities often set out with a goal of teaching students how to think, and to the extent that we're effective in doing that, again, we could think about that as kind of adapting our thought processes. But sometimes when that kind of question is asked, the intent is to refer to thought processes as a kind of a lower level, basic kind of process. And in that case, I think they're going to be less adaptable than some of these higher level kinds of processes. And I think that's a close to a kind of general principle in cognitive science. So as you move from kind of low level basic processes all the way up to kind of higher level processes, you're gonna get more adaptable and more changeable.
Okay, and then our next cognitive question is, or I don't know if it's really a cognitive question, but what are your thoughts on the role of technology and how it's impacted the way we think?
Yeah, so this is a kind of central question that we kind of battle with in the lab. But again, like we approach it as cognitive scientists. And so we end up with fairly kind of focused questions about how using a technology in a certain way might impact us. I think it's a fascinating question to consider both at that level, but also at a larger kind of societal level as well. However, sometimes those larger societal questions are difficult to answer. They often involve forecasting how some technology might impact human cognition well into the future, which can be wonderful and engaging to talk about, difficult to answer with any confidence as an experimental psychologist. But one thing I will mention related to our work is the importance of considering trade-offs. So we do work on cognitive offloading. So here we use some, let's say, external artifact to offload memory demands. I might store a phone number in my calendar on my smartphone or something like that. And I do that because that smartphone's memory is excellent. I also do that because it relieves any kind of demands I may have invested myself, in effort I may have invested myself in trying to remember that information, so that we have all those benefits. We have an accurate, we're going to be able to remember that information accurately, and we've reduced our effort, both things that are, I think most people would consider beneficial. But of course, what we've also come to learn is that if you are then in a situation where you need to recall that information, but you don't have your external aid anymore, you end up in a position where your memory is much worse than it would have been if you never had it in the first place, right? So you go and you lose your smartphone, and now all those phone numbers, dates are gone. So there are costs, right? And I think there's going to be benefits and costs of any technology, any kind of technology that's designed to allow us to kind of offload some work from our minds into the external environment. And in each case, whether we're talking about GPS and navigation, or some, artificial intelligence decision support, where it's making the decisions rather than us making the decisions, or the GPS is navigating rather than us kind of navigating, we're going to have questions that involve those kinds of trade-offs. And how we as individuals and a society weigh those costs and benefits is something we need to think long and hard about. What a researcher can contribute, and what we try to contribute in a small way, is to provide some deeper understanding of those costs and benefits, in particular from a cognitive perspective.
I kind of just have a follow-up question. It's not on our list, but just like kind of talking about everything. So how do you think open book testing and like virtual learning and all this very quick learning is affecting students? So like going from memorizing a lot of content for an exam versus doing like weekly small quizzes, or even just book testing. Like, how do you think that's affecting our learning and memory?
Well, there's probably a few questions in there. So regular testing, I'll just note, is a very effective way to learn. Of all the methods that I think cognitive scientists have come to emphasize, particularly over the last 10 or 15 years, testing, or what we might call retrieval practice, is a really important one. So I don't know if that's particular to virtual learning. In my in-person classes, we test regularly. But maybe it's easier in the virtual environment to do that. So regular testing, I think, is important. Open book testing, there's been, I think, less work investigating the relative benefits. But I think as students, you'd probably appreciate that how you study is going to be much different for an open book test than for a closed book test. And from an educational point of view, it might be valuable to do both, because these are both likely skills that you'll want to have in your toolkit. Open book testing might, for example, better mimic what your life might be in the workforce, where no one's taking all your information and knowledge from you right before the test, and it's not important to not always important to be able to bring it up from memory. What's important is that you're able to do the job, and an open book test is a relatively good simulation of that. But the closed book tests are good. A good test of what you've stored internally, and that can be valuable as well.
Thank you. And as our final question, we want to ask, if you hadn't pursued your academic career in cognitive psychology, so your journey to becoming a professor, where do you think you'd be now? Do you think you'd still be in psychology or possibly a different area?
Yeah, that's a great question. I do spend some time reflecting on that. I think the thing that I've come to like, or I think the thing that drew me initially, and I've come to appreciate even more, is the research aspect of what I do. So I'm fascinated by the mind and the brain, and I'm thrilled each day that I can come here and do research and work with students and pursue those kinds of ends. But yeah, I could imagine myself being a researcher in a different domain, but I think the research would be consistent. So maybe I'd be researching vaccines or animal behavior or economics or you name it. I think that that process of discovery, working with others through that process of discovery and teaching students how to approach that process is what really drives me. And I think you could probably do that in other domains, but I ended up with in cognitive psychology, and I'm pretty happy there.
All right, thank you. That was all of our questions. We really appreciate you taking the time to answer them. This is going to be on our YouTube page. I'm going to stop the recording. This is going to be on the